The first thing I registered was the taste. Metallic. Like I had been chewing on a handful of old pennies. Then, the pain. It was not just an ache. It was a roar. A white-hot line of fire tearing through my lower back. As if someone had taken a zipper and just pulled my skin apart, my eyes snapped open. I was staring at a ceiling tile with a water stain shaped like a map of Florida. The steady, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor was the only sound in the room. I tried to sit up, and the world tilted violently. A gasp escaped my throat. Raw and dry, a nurse appeared in my peripheral vision. She looked kind, but her eyes would not meet mine. She told me I was in recovery at the Elysian Institute and that I had undergone a little procedure. A procedure. The word hung in the air. Heavy and wrong. I had not come here for a procedure. I bad come here for a wellness retreat. A girls' weekend with my mother. Massages. Herbal teas. Reconnecting. I reached back. My hand trembling. And my fingers brushed against thick gauze taped to my left flank. Panic. Cold and sharp. Pierced through the fog of anesthesia. I asked her what they had done. I asked her what they had taken. Before the nurse could answer, the door opened. 2 uniformed officers walked in. Behind them, a doctor in a pristine white coat looked like he was about to vomit. One of the officers, a woman with a face like carved granite, stepped forward and asked if I was Sasha Miller. I nodded. Barely. She told me they had questions about the consent forms for my surgery that morning. I told her immediately that I did not sign any forms and I did not consent to anything. The doctor stepped forward then, holding a clipboard like a shield. He turned it around and said my mother signed as my legal guardian. He claimed, she said, I was incapacitated. I stared at the signature. Barbara Miller. The loops were perfect. The same hand that used to sign my report cards. I told them I am 28 years old. I do not have a guardian. The officer looked at me. Then at the doctor. Her expression softened. Just a fraction. She asked me if I knew where my kidney was right now. The world stopped. The beeping of the monitor faded into a dull hum. I knew. Of course I knew. It was not in a biohazard bin. It was not being studied in a lab. It is downstairs. I said, and my voice was ice. It is inside my brother. If you are listening to this, and your hands are shaking just a little bit, drop a comment below. Tell me your city and what time it is. I need to know. I am not the only one awake in this nightmare. To understand the theft, you have to understand the layout of the crime scene. And the crime scene was not the hospital room. It was my entire life. 3 weeks before I woke up without a kidney. I sat at my parents' dining table for Christmas. I had placed a small white envelope next to my father's plate. Inside was a receipt for an all-expenses-paid cruise to the Mediterranean. It had cost me 6 months of savings. But I wanted to see them smile at me the way they smiled at my brother. They never even opened it. The front door slammed open. And Caleb stumbled in. He was 3 hours late. High on something that made his pupils look like pinpricks. And he had just wrapped his Porsche around a telephone pole 2 blocks away. My mother did not yell. She did not ask if he was okay. She just rushed to him, cooing, checking his face for scratches. While my father immediately got on the phone with their lawyer to bury the DUI, I sat there, watching the steam rise off the turkey I had cooked. And I realized the dynamic perfectly. Caleb broke things. I fixed them. He was the asset. I was the insurance policy. So when my mother called me a week later, voice soft and trembling, asking for a girls' weekend at the Elysian Institute in Sedona, I should have hung up. I should have known better, but here is the thing about survivors of that kind of dynamic. We are trained to be hungry. When you starve a dog long enough, It does not bite the hand that finally offers a bone. It licks it. My parents had conditioned me to view their attention as a scarce resource. Something to be hoarded and cherished. I did not see a trap. I saw a crumb. And I was starving. I said yes. The institute was beautiful. Red rocks. White linens. Silence that cost $2,000 a night. On the second evening, my mother made us tea. She said it was a special blend for relaxation. It tasted like licorice and ash. 10 minutes later, the room started to swim. My limbs felt heavy, like they were filled with concrete. I looked at my mother. She was not drinking hers. She was watching me, her face completely void of emotion. It was the look of someone waiting for a timer to go off. Panic flared. But my training kicked in faster. I am a clinical trial auditor. My entire career is built on noticing anomalies in data, on catching the thing that does not fit. This did not fit. I did not scream. I did not ask why. I knew I had seconds before I went under. I slipped my hand under the table, tapped the side of my smartwatch 3 times. It was a preset distress protocol I used when I traveled alone for work. Silent alarm. GPS coordinates sent to local dispatch. Medical emergency code. As my head hit the table, the last thing I saw was my mother picking up her phone. She did not call for help. She called the front desk and said she was ready. She thought she had won. She thought she was dragging a helpless body to the slaughter. She did not know she was dragging a ticking time bomb. For the next 3 days, I played the role they wrote for me. The confused, medicated, grateful little sister. Richard and Barbara visited every afternoon. They brought imported lilies and chocolates that cost more than my car payment. They sat by my bed and rewrote reality in real time. My father patted my hand with a hand that felt like cold leather, telling me I was spiraling. He said I told them I wanted to redeem myself. He said I begged them to let me save Caleb. My mother nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, telling me they saved me from my own guilt and that I should be thanking them. I looked at them. I looked at the way my mother checked her reflection in the hospital window. I looked at the way my father checked his watch. I thanked them in a whisper, letting my voice crack. I told them I was so lost. They beamed. They bought it. They left the room feeling like saints. But the moment the door clicked shut, I sat up. The pain in my back was a scream. But I pushed it into a box in my mind labeled irrelevant data. My parents thought they had neutralized me. They thought I was just a mid-level manager with a penchant for spreadsheets. They forgot exactly what a clinical trial auditor does. I do not just check boxes. I hunt ghosts in the data. I find the money that moves when nobody is looking. I find the patients who disappear from the records. I find the lies. I pulled my laptop from my bag. The institute's Wi-Fi was encrypted. Secure. A fortress. For most people, I bypassed the guest login and went straight for the staff portal. I did not need to hack the firewall, I just needed to find the weak link. Every medical facility has one. Usually a billing department that uses default passwords for shared drives. 1 click. Access granted. I was not looking for medical records. I was looking for the ledger. It took me 10 minutes to find the smoking gun. It was not hidden deep. Arrogance makes people sloppy. There it was. A wire transfer dated 2 days before my surgery. $150,000. The recipient was not the institute. It was the Sterling Foundation for Holistic Wellness, a non-profit registered personally to Dr. Sterling. My father had not paid a hospital bill. He had paid a bribe. I kept digging. I pulled up the intake forms. There was an affidavit attached to my file, titled Declaration of Mental Incompetence. It claimed I had a history of psychotic breaks and self-harm. Signed by a psychiatrist I had never met. I downloaded everything. The wire transfer, the affidavit, the timestamps showing the money moved before I even arrived in Arizona. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. I did not feel sad. I did not feel betrayed. Those are emotions for family. I looked at the files and I felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a balanced equation. They were not my parents anymore. They were non-compliant entities. And I was about to initiate a full-scale audit. The $150,000 was just the overhead. That was the cost of doing business. But every auditor knows that you do not just look at the expenses. You look at the projected return on investment. My parents were liquidating assets to keep up appearances at the country club. They did not have that kind of cash lying around to bribe a surgeon. They were leveraging something. I kept scrolling through the Institute's patient legal folder. It was a messy dump of PDF files, liability waivers, insurance cards, emergency contact forms, and then I saw it, a file named S. Miller Life Policy Supplement. I opened it. It was not a standard health insurance document. It was a term life policy, taken out 90 days ago. The face value was $2.5 million. I scanned the clauses. It was a high-risk policy, the kind you buy when you are betting against the house. There was a specific rider for death due to surgical complications. My breath hitched. They had not just stolen an organ. They had hedged their bets. If the surgery went well, Caleb got a kidney, and they got their golden child back. If the surgery went wrong, if I bled out on the table, or had a reaction to the anesthesia they administered without a chart, Caleb still got the kidney, and they got $2.5 million. I was an asset, and I was worth more as a liquidation event than as a going concern. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the discovery. I forced myself to keep looking. There had to be more. You do not take out a policy like that without a contingency plan. I found the final document at the bottom of the scroll. Advance Directive. Do not resuscitate. It was dated the morning of the surgery. Signed by Barbara Miller, legal guardian, A.N.R., for a healthy 28-year-old woman undergoing a procedure she had not consented to. If my heart had stopped on that table. Dr. Sterling was not supposed to restart it. He was under orders to let me go. My mother had signed my death warrant with the same pen she used to sign the check for the bribe. I closed the laptop. The silence in the hospital room was deafening. I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot where my parents' Range Rover was parked. They were probably sleeping soundly at the hotel, dreaming of their payout. The grief I had been holding on to the little girl inside me who just wanted her mom to love her finally died. It withered up and blew away like ash. I touched the cold glass. They wanted a tragedy? They wanted a payout? I would give them a tragedy. But I was going to be the one writing the ending. 2 weeks later, the invitation arrived. Heavy cream stock, gold foil lettering. The Miller family invites you to a celebration of life, honoring the miraculous recovery of Caleb Miller. It was being held at the Pine Creek Country Club. Black tie. 300 guests. My parents were not just throwing a party, they were launching a rebranding campaign. They called me the next day. My mother's voice dripped with artificial sweetness as she told me they really hoped I could make it because it would mean so much to Caleb. I told her I would be there. My father added on the other line that they were hoping I might say a few words. About the gift of life. About family sacrifice. I smiled into the receiver. I told them I would love to say a few words. They thought they were managing me. They thought that by giving me a microphone, they were buying my silence. They assumed that my shame, or my fear, or my desperate need for their approval would keep me in line. Narcissists always make the same mistake. They believe everyone else is playing by their rules. They believe the image is the only thing that matters. I spent the next week preparing. Not a speech, but a presentation. I contacted the country club under the guise of coordinating the AV setup for my parents. I got access to the projection system. I uploaded my files. I tested the remote. I bought a dress. Not something modest and blending in like I usually wore. I bought a red silk gown that fit like a second skin. It was a power move. It was a statement. I was not coming as the victim. I was coming as the executioner. The night of the gala. The ballroom was a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. My parents were in their element. Holding court. Accepting congratulations for their son's miraculous recovery. Caleb stood by the bar. Looking healthy and smug. Soaking up the attention. I stood in the shadows at the back of the room. Watching them. It was fascinating. Really. The way they moved. The way they smiled. It was all a performance. A carefully constructed facade to hide the rot underneath. They loved the applause. They lived for it. And that was exactly why this had to happen here. If I had gone to the police quietly, they would have spun it. They would have hired expensive lawyers and PR firms. They would have made me look crazy in the press. But here, in front of their friends, their business partners, the people whose envy they fed on, there was no spin for this. The lights dimmed. My father stepped up to the podium. A spotlight hitting him. He thanked everyone for coming. His voice thick with emotion. He talked about family and love, and the sacrifices we make for the ones we hold dear. He paused for effect. Wiping a tear from his eye, he spoke about me, calling me a quiet soul who struggled to find her place. He said when my brother needed me, I stepped up. He said, I gave the ultimate gift. The crowd applauded. My mother dabbed at her eyes. My father gestured into the darkness and called me up to tell everyone what this meant to me. I stepped into the light. The applause grew louder. I walked up the steps to the stage, my heels clicking on the wood. I took the microphone from my father's hand. He smiled at me. A tight, warning smile that said, stick to the script. I looked out at the sea of faces. 300 people waiting to be inspired. Waiting for the heartwarming story of sisterly love. I smiled back. I told them I didn't give a gift. I told them I was harvested. My voice echoed through the silent ballroom. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. My father's smile froze. He took a half step toward me. But I did not flinch. I continued. My voice gaining strength. I explained that my parents told everyone I was struggling mentally, and that I volunteered. But the truth was, I woke up in a recovery room with a missing kidney and a consent form I never signed. I pulled the remote from my pocket and told them not to take my word for it. I told them to look at the data. I pressed the button, the giant screen behind me, which had been displaying a slideshow of Caleb's childhood photos, went black for a split second. Then, a new image appeared. It was the consent form from the Elysian Institute. I called it Exhibit A. I pointed out the timestamp, 10:32 a.m. Then I told them to look at the anesthesia record below it. Sedative administered at 10:47 a.m. I pointed to the screen and emphasized the 15-minute gap. That was how long they waited after drugging me to forge my mother's signature as my legal guardian. The room was dead silent. You could hear the ice melting in the glasses. I clicked the remote again. Exhibit B. A wire transfer for $150,000. From my father's business account to the personal foundation of Dr. Sterling, the surgeon who performed the operation. I looked at Dr. Sterling, who was standing near the buffet table, his face the color of ash. I told the crowd that is the price of a kidney on the black market. In case they were wondering, my mother let out a strangled cry and tried to rush the stage, screaming for someone to stop me, claiming I was having a breakdown. But two men in dark suits stepped out from behind the curtain and blocked her path. They were not security. They were federal agents. I clicked the remote one last time. And finally, Exhibit C. The screen filled with the image of the life insurance policy. And the DNR order. $2.5 million. I said, my voice cold. Payable upon death due to surgical complications. And a do not resuscitate order signed by my mother before the surgery even began. I looked at my parents. They were frozen. Trapped in the spotlight of their own making. Caleb was bent over a trash can. Retching. I told them they didn't just steal a part of me. They bet on my death. They signed a paper that said if my heart stopped, no one was allowed to start it again. I turned back to the crowd. I told them when they applaud my brother's recovery tonight, they should remember what it cost. It did not cost sacrifice. It cost a bribe. It cost a forgery. It cost a daughter. I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a thud that sounded like a gavel. My mother screamed my father's name, demanding he do something. Richard stared at me, his eyes wide with horror and rage. He choked out that I was killing my mother. I looked him dead in the eye. No, I said. I am just auditing the books. Richard and Barbara were escorted out in handcuffs. Screaming threats and denials that echoed off the ballroom walls. The flash of cameras captured every agonizing second of their downfall. Caleb, sobbing on the floor, was led away by paramedics. His golden boy facade shattered beyond repair. I watched them go, feeling a strange lightness in my chest. No more fear. No more secrets. No more being the spare part. I walked out of the country club, past the flashing lights of the police cars, and into the cool night air. I did not look back. 6 months later, I sat at a cafe table in Prague, watching the Vltava River flow by. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts and old stone. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank. The final wire transfer from the sale of my story rights had cleared. I opened my laptop and logged into my student loan account. Balance: $0. I smiled. My parents were serving 20-year sentences for insurance fraud, conspiracy, and assault. Their assets had been seized. Their reputation obliterated. Caleb was living in a halfway house, blacklisted from every transplant list in the country for participating in the fraud. I touched the scar on my lower back. It was faint now. A silver line of memory. It did not hurt anymore. It was just a mark. A receipt. I opened my cloud drive and navigated to the folder labeled Family. Inside were the scans, the recordings, the evidence of a lifetime of betrayal. I hovered the cursor over the delete button. I did not need the proof anymore. I knew who I was. I knew what I was worth. And I knew that I would never again let anyone treat me like an option. I clicked. Are you sure you want to permanently delete these items? The folder vanished. I closed my laptop, finished my coffee, and walked out into the cobblestone streets, ready to start the first day of the rest of my life.